Right, afternoon everyone. It's great to be here. As mentioned, I'm Terry and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Fusebox Games. We were recently acquired by Nazara, so we're very happy to be part of Nazara Group. Today I'm going to be talking to you about interactive fiction games. It will come as no shock that Fusebox build interactive fiction games, free to play on mobile. And I'm really just going to have one goal for this session, so I'm going to try and keep it simple, and that is to essentially impress upon you how important interactive fiction is as a genre, and how essentially you should be considering interactive fiction right now. And I do mean now, and I'll come on to exactly why I mean now. So I'm going to break it down a little bit so you can follow, because there's a few key concepts and a few reasons why interactive fiction is so important. So firstly, we're going to talk about the what. So what is interactive fiction? So I want to see a show of hands. Does everyone know what interactive fiction is? Okay, that's pretty good. Excellent. I'm also going to talk about why interactive fiction is great for IP, and I'm also going to talk about why IP is important with the current challenges that we have in the games industry. Okay, so a little bit about me. So I've been in the games industry for 16 years. I started out in QA way back in the day, and I've predominantly spent most of my time, well, almost exclusively whilst I'm in the games industry, working on IP games. Now, those of you that have worked on IP games will understand some of the challenges that you have from working with IP holders. So you have very strict kind of regulations on what you can do. You work with brand teams that don't necessarily know how to make games or even care about games. So sometimes that's quite difficult. Sometimes you work with lawyers. But essentially that's what I've been focusing on through my career. During my career, I've worked on multiple kind of high value IPs, Star Wars, Transformers, Formula One, Tomb Raider, and I've worked at companies such as Square Enix Codemasters, as well as quite a few smaller startups. And about 7 years ago, I switched away from games for a little bit and took some time out to work in tech. So that would be financial tech, so working in challenger banks in the UK, property tech, and health tech. And I learned quite a few things being outside of the games industry. So when I left the games industry, there was a big exodus of games people. So a lot of tech industries realized how much experience games employees and people in the games industry had around using data to make decisions, but also we'd pretty much had the most experience in free-to-play, so converting players, using data, using player behavior to convert players to payers, and there wasn't really that knowledge in the tech industry. So there was quite a hiring kind of, a hiring push to poach people from the games industry to go and work in the tech industry. And I jumped to DAZN, which is a sports streaming platform, and then I jumped subsequently to fintech and health tech. And I think some of the key learnings there, which come across in this presentation, or hopefully they do, is the importance of product fit, which sometimes we don't consider that much in games. And there's been a few great talks actually already and a few great panels that talk about the idea of, do you go with a passion project? Do you try and analyze the industry first, analyze the opportunities? My approach generally from working in product outside of games and then coming back into games is to focus on the opportunity. So outside of games, we think about what problems there are and how to solve those problems. That's how you build products, right? So a problem being, people have to travel to go get their food. Okay, well, solve that problem. You have Uber Eats, you have Deliveroo. And sometimes we don't think about games in that way. We think about, I want to make a great space game. And I want to make a great space game. Is someone going to pay me to make a great space game? Probably not. So it's thinking about product fit and about the business. Build a business first and the games can come, or even get a strong game out first, get a strong kind of revenue stream coming in. And then if you want to make your passion project later, maybe you've got a chance. So that's not to say that you shouldn't work on passion projects. You need passion. You need that drive to work in the games industry and to succeed in the games industry. But taking into account product fit and taking into account working out a business plan, not just a GDD, but a business plan of how you're going to succeed with that game is really important. And it's something definitely that is much more focused on outside of tech. So, a bold statement to start off. So interactive fiction is one of the purest forms of digital storytelling that include player agency. So that's pretty bold. What do I mean by that? So firstly, the digital aspect of this. So has anyone ever read a Choose Your Own Adventure book? Hands? Choose Your Own Adventure? So if you imagine that this is the first iteration of interactive fiction, well, it's not quite interactive. Well, I suppose it is. Away from just reading a book, right? So you read a book, and you're getting into a world. But you're always reading passively, right? You can assume yourself as the character, but you can never actually be the character. Choose Your Own Adventures was really the first step before digital in being able to have player agency. You were able to choose different routes through the book. You were able to see the different outcomes. So it was really kind of like the non-digital version of an interactive fiction. So then we come on to player agency. I just want to say player agency is essentially the player's choices mean something. Now, we'll come on to a little bit about what like interactive fiction examples, but obviously players' choices mean a lot of things in a lot of games. So you have GTA, your choices mean a lot of things in there. So I'm not saying that those aren't, they don't have player agency. I'm just saying in terms of the purest form of digital storytelling, I'd say that interactive fiction is pretty up there. So here's some examples of mid-core interactive fiction. So we have Walking Dead, Expanse, Wolf Among Us, my favorite being The Expanse. So these came out by Telltale Games, and there are others, Heavy Rain. So there are quite a few mid-core interactive fiction games, and they're quite light on gameplay. So some of them have kind of some shooting mechanics, but very, very kind of rare. And then we have the more casual interactive fiction games. We have Episodes, which is one of our competitors, and then we have Love Island the Game, which is Fusebox Interactive's flagship title. I made it slightly bigger because we deserve the space. But these are free-to-play interactive fiction games. So this is essentially the interactive fiction genre, okay? So that is the niche that I want to talk about, but I actually want to tell you, I don't want to go too much into detail about interactive fiction. What I want to tell you is why you should consider interactive fiction. So we're going to come on to IPs, okay? Now, I touched on GTA. You can say Call of Duty, you can say any of these big games, but they're not as synergistic with IP delivery and IP games as something like interactive fiction. I'm going to say why. So, firstly, the simple format of interactive fiction, you are essentially choosing your way through a storyline. There is no first-person shooters. There is no, shooting mechanic. There's no, top-down building mechanics or anything like that. And the simple format actually lends itself very well to transmuting just from games, but also to IPs. So a good example, you can't have, or maybe you can, it would be quite fun, but you can't really have a Housewives of Delhi first-person shooter, right? So whilst it might be quite fun, the IP holders certainly wouldn't be signing that off. But obviously you could have a Housewives of Delhi's interactive fiction, because at the end of the day it's about role-playing, so role-playing is there. But it's also about the minor game mechanics. So when you layer on more game mechanics, you tend to narrow down the opportunities to layer in and to work with IP. Okay? So interactive fiction can essentially be classed as an IP agnostic. I suppose the most IP agnostic genre. Now, I'm going to move on and talk about some of the challenges that we have in the industry, and again, how working on interactive fiction games, or even delivering interactive fiction games in this genre, could help you overcome those industry challenges. So the first thing is a quote. So again, I like to add quotes to these presentations. So to keep pace with progress, a business must embrace change as its constant guide. So a very famous quote. Anyone know who the quote's by? ChatGPT. In my hotel room last night. I did have JFK as a quote, but actually I think ChatGPT is probably more topical right now in terms of what's happening in the industry. I don't know how I feel about using ChatGPT to do quotes, but anyway. Okay, so we're going to now touch on the challenges we have in the industry. Okay, so, and again, a couple of panels earlier touched on these and really went into some great detail, so I won't kind of go too deep. So discoverability, certainly on the App Store and on Steam, has become a very big challenge now. Even being promoted by Apple and Google doesn't mean the same as it used to. You don't get the kind of install base that you used to. Apple will never tell you that you're going to be featured. Google rarely do now. Discoverability has become a major issue for indie developers. It's become a major issue for all developers, including publishers. And this is essentially only going to get worse as we start to see the barrier of entry for games getting lower, right? So as we start to see AI-generated games come through, as we already have, the app stores will fill up even further than they are. Discoverability will become harder than it already is, which is almost impossible now without putting funding through to your game. So we need a way of rising above the quality, the lower quality of games that are going to be coming to the stores and raising the quality bar. Player choice and time is becoming very difficult. Everyone now is fighting for a player's time and players to choose. So again, touches on discoverability, but also once you get a player, and that's difficult, you've got to keep a player. And that's difficult because players are going on Facebook, they're seeing ads for other games. You've got to retain those players. Players' choice is becoming kind of out of control, right? You've just got games everywhere, there's constant ads, people are on their phones, and it's very difficult to retain players with the amount of choice. And finally, as we touched on earlier, in an earlier panel, user acquisition has become more difficult. And we're probably tired of everyone saying how good user acquisition used to be in the good old days. It's changed and it's not going back. But it now has limitations, and we need to look at other forms of making up that shortfall. So AAA games, PC games, they never had the user acquisition possibilities that we have with mobile games. So they had to do something different. They built communities. At one point, everyone had a YouTube channel. Every studio had a YouTube channel. They had 2 people presenting, and they were building up communities. So again, that's one way we can do it. IP and IP games is another way we can do it, and I'm gonna touch on how. Okay, so now we've talked about the problems, and there are many problems. Obviously, this is a very subset of the problems that we face. And if you want to get me moaning about problems, you can buy me a beer in the bar later, and I'll talk to you all day about the problems we have. But IP games, to overcome those problems, IP games are one of the possibilities that we can do, right? So discoverability. So IP games, or games based on popular IPs, already have an existing audience, right? So there is already an audience there. They're bought in, they understand the world, and they're looking for more content. And also, they're willing, because they're so bought in, Star Wars fans, Transformers, Love Island, because they're so bought into these worlds, they're watching multiple seasons, they're much more willing to share, they're much more willing to engage with their favorite IPs. So there is an existing audience already there for you to tap into. And as we'll see later, a lot of these big IPs just don't have games, right? So there are no games for these big IPs. And they're only really starting to come round to this idea of every IP should have a game. Well, good IP. The same way that merchandising, right? Every IP should have merchandising. Every IP should have a game. Like, why would you not? It's an outlet. It's another medium for you to sell your brand. IP holders actively support us. So our IP holders, ITV for Love Island, actively support us with TV ads. So we're not having to worry as much about App Store discovery. We're not having to go out and build communities ourselves. Those communities exist, and ITV or other brand holders support us by posting on their social channels. They've got talent, which is fantastic, especially here in India, right? Talent is massive. So imagine being able to get someone to talk about your game. You sign an IP, part of that IP deal is for them to talk about your game, to send people to post on their Instagram, why don't you go check out this game? Just absolutely outstanding in terms of ways of getting installs. And then transmedia. I'm going to do another hand show. I'm going to keep doing this. Does anyone know what transmedia is? I saw that hand. Yeah, okay. So we'll come on to that, but transmedia is something that is going to change the IP landscape for games, probably for good. And I will come back to this. But essentially, again, IP holders are starting to come around to the idea of games. They're starting to provide games with direct links out from their big channels. And to go into some of the historical problems why IP hasn't necessarily made it all the way through to games is companies like TV companies, traditional broadcasters, they just don't know about games. They never grew up playing games. They don't understand the mechanics. They don't understand the business. They don't understand the value. And they hate change. Right? They know how to make TV shows, and all they want to do is make TV shows. But now they're struggling to make money. Right? Everyone is struggling to make money, and they're now starting to realize that this is an output for them to continue to generate revenue. So they will help with you. They will send direct links to your game. But also, if you think about a player, and you think about how much we pay to win players back when they leave, how much would you pay for a player to see another ad for your game to bring them back after they've left, like a whale, right? You would pay a lot of money. But actually, even the fact of a player viewing Love Island on the TV and suddenly realizing, I used to really enjoy that game, I can't remember why I left. Like, you get this positive reinforcement. So you're not doing all the work. The IP holders are creating TV shows, films, whatever. They're doing the work for you. They're winning your players back as well. And again, you're not having to pay them for that. So they are just creating this environment. Player choice and time. So again, with a brand, as players' time becomes more limited, as people get taken up, not everyone's playing games 24/7. They're on social media, they're on Instagram, Facebook, they're doing other things. So how much time they really spend in playing games is quite valuable to a player. And so players will go with trusted brands over a game that they don't know. Because they've got very limited amount of time and they value their time. It's a lot easier on the second one. It's a lot easier to come into a world that you understand, to commit your time to something that you know is going to be good, that has an inherent quality value because the brand that you love has quality. Players are much more likely to use their time for those brands rather than to pick up something new. And this is actually an interesting, to reinforce this, it's actually a very interesting point that TV shows and films, right? So have you ever come in the evening and you've gone, okay, fine, I would like to watch a film, but actually, I don't think I can commit that much time to watching a film. Like 2 hours these days, 2.5 hours. So you're like, oh, but I can watch a TV show. And then you end up watching like 8 episodes of a TV show. You spent way longer than you were going to watch a film for. That's that idea of perceived time. Okay, people perceive their time before they spend it. They think, okay, fine. And they don't want to commit to too much. We commit less and less time these days than we ever have before, right? In our heads, we commit less time so that essentially that perceived value of, oh, I'm going to spend 40 minutes learning the mechanics of this game, or I'm going to spend 40 minutes learning the world. I mean, sometimes you want to do that because you want to learn a new world. But on mobile, if you're just sitting down before dinner and you want to spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes playing a free-to-play game, you are not going to pick up a new game, right? You are going to pick something that you like, something that you enjoy, something you understand. Okay, so we've done what are interactive fiction games. We have done what are the industry problems that we have, and we've done why IP fits interactive fiction, or why interactive fiction fit IP. So going way back to the first slide, I said, and I used the word very specifically, I said now. Why is it important that you consider interactive fiction games now? Transmedia. Okay, so what is transmedia? So transmedia is something that is the top of the agenda for all big streaming platforms, IP holders. They are now focusing on this word of transmedia, and I think we only had one person that put their hand up that actually knew what this was. So what is it? So transmedia is the concept of basically surrounding players with IP, right? So you can see this from Disney, right? How many games does Disney put out for Star Wars? You've got new games coming out every quarter. Maybe they've overdone it a little bit, but new games every quarter. You've got audiobooks, you've got films, you've got TV shows. I mean, you've got all kinds of things, right? And the idea here is to essentially create this world where everything feeds into one another. You play the game or you watch the film, and then you're like, oh, I want to expand on that. I want to explore that IP more. I want to explore the world more. So then you pick up the game, and then you pick up the book, and then you keep going, and you're going, and you're in this world, and they never let go of you, right? They never let go of you. You are generating revenue in all of these different places, and you don't even realize it, because yes, you may have a limit of how much you want to spend on your mobile on a free-to-play game, but you don't necessarily think the same. You're not thinking about how much money you want to spend on Star Wars. You're thinking how much money you want to spend on a platform. So then you go and buy a book, and you don't equate those two things together, right? So, and then suddenly, before you know it, you've spent 100 quid on Star Wars, right? And Disney are laughing. Now, they are all focusing on this. So you've seen from Netflix, I logged on to Indian Netflix last night, and it's the same as the UK. They've got games, right, front and center now. And that's the same, that will be the same. Well, it already is the same for Paramount. They're starting to layer in games into their browsing. And it's going to be the same for Amazon. There's lots of posts. I encourage you to go out and have a look about transmedia. There's lots of big higher-ups in Amazon talking about transmedia and how it's the future for them. But here's the problem. Making games is really hard. Like, it's hard, right? We all know it's hard. And sometimes people from outside the games industry think they can do it. And they can to a certain extent, but also they can't. And we've seen from Netflix went through a phase of going out to studios and paying them quite ridiculous amounts of money to build games for their IPs. Then they tried to bring those internally. We've already seen the first Netflix studio fail because making games is hard, right? And managing game teams is hard. So again, now we're starting to see that there's opportunities for all of these studios, for all of these IPs. They're now out looking for people to make games. And when, as Fusebox, we see this environment, we are perfectly positioned with the understanding of interactive fiction games, our contacts in the IP world to make these games, and we're very excited. But we welcome people to step out and be competitors, right? Because there's so much IP. If you just open up Netflix tonight and look at all those TV shows, and then think about interactive fiction, think about role-playing, think about just make a game for an interactive fiction game for Big Boss, for example. So this is the reason why now. And this is the opportunity, right? So the opportunity is that you can make games for these publishers or IP holders. They're looking for people to make games, and interactive fiction as a genre is, well, maybe people in my studio wouldn't like to hear this, but it's fairly kind of like low, I don't want to say effort, a low barrier to entry, right? Essentially, once you've got the mechanics there, you're looking at art and you're looking at some narrative, right? And from the people that we've spoken to whilst we've been here, the talent is absolutely here to do these games. And a lot of these panels have kind of said, don't go big straight away, right? Don't go for the 50 million, don't go for the 5 million. Cut your teeth, well, get started on small games. Get started on some bets, get some knowledge about building games. And this is a fairly kind of, you have to get the deals, which is a challenge, but once you've got those deals, they're fairly kind of safe bets. And you'll build up experience with free to play, you'll build up experience building to timelines, and working with IP holders. And hopefully, I've impressed upon you the importance of interactive fiction games and the opportunities that there are. And that is me, with time for questions. Shagun, who's not a plant and works at Fusebox.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you, Terry. It was a very different side of the business I'm looking at right now. So when we start the business, right? So what, like interactive fiction, definitely it can be a big boss, can be my passion, but getting the big boss IP is not easy. So what should be, when we start this business, when we start the studio, what should be the focus?
Sure, yeah. So I think when you start the studio, again, touching on kind of the first point that I made and off the back of some of the panels we had earlier, is be very clear on what you're trying to achieve, right? Be very clear. Find a niche, and interactive fiction could be that niche, and narrow down on it, right? And become experts in that. And you can't become experts without doing necessarily, but you can beat everyone else by being the first, or the second, or the third. Like there's enough IPs to go around. Create the tools, show that you can do the tools, find smaller IP holders, right? You don't need to go after the big bosses of this world. You can go after school friends, right? I've watched a couple of episodes, it's very good. It's quite like some of the TV shows we've got in the UK. So there are layers of IPs, right? So you can do a deal with a smaller IP holder, an indie IP holder, right? They're out there as well. They're looking for games. So match someone of your size, create a relationship with that team that's synergistic to both of you. You both want to try and generate revenue. You both want to try and get experience. So work on those and then build your way up. It's not necessarily sexy. It's not big. It's not huge. But it's about gaining the experience, gaining the knowledge, and I keep coming back to all the other panels because they've been fantastic. But you've got to start somewhere and build up that knowledge, build up that year, 2 year, 3 year of experience. And once you've got that experience, you are streets ahead or way ahead of other people, right? But you've got to start.
Interactive fiction games are majorly like for mobile. Like even I played these Fusebox games. So these are like vertical, it's not horizontal. So is there market beyond mobile? Like is the market for web or any other things? And is Fusebox investing in it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we focus mainly on mobile, but there absolutely is, right? There absolutely is beyond just mobile. So some of the examples are obviously the mid-core, so they're on Steam. Again, it kind of like you match your audience, right? So we work on mobile because we work with Love Island, and Love Island is predominantly female audience, and mobile audiences skew, like the mobile audience skews towards female. But if, for example, we had a slightly more mid-core IP, then we could release on Steam, we could release on web, don't pigeonhole pigeonhole is an English term. Don't focus down and narrow yourself on one genre. Think about your experience, right? Where do you want to build? Where do you see the possibilities? Don't just go mobile. It can be any platform.
First of all, sir, I really liked the session, and I'm really glad that someone's talking about interactive fiction, because I was also playing that choices game and the games you have created. And sir, I wanted to ask, how's the future looking like for interactive fiction in that main genre, like PlayStation and PC gaming and all? So.
Yep, that's a good question. So the question is, what does the future look like for interactive fiction, for PlayStation, Steam, bigger things? Again, step back, go on to Netflix or go on to Disney or whatever, and look at all those IPs, and search whether or not there's an interactive fiction game there, or would there be a good interactive fiction game? I can do it for you, and the answer is yes. There are opportunities all through IPs to build interactive fiction games. So there's a big opportunity. There's a huge opportunity. And actually there was in Cannes, in France, there's something called MIPCON, which is where all the TV people come together and they talk about, it's like this, right? So they talk about TV shows, less so films, but essentially they are talking about TV shows and brands. And this year was the first time that there was a lot of focus on games. Okay, and before that, there hasn't been any talks, there hasn't been any presentations about games, and this year was really the first year where games were brought up, and the value of games is really now starting to be shown. So, yeah, go on Netflix later, have a look, and I can guarantee you'll be able to find an IP, and that IP will be able to build. You'll be able to build that on PC as well, depending on the IP.
Okay, sir. And so one more question.
Yep.
So as you talk that time has audience interactive time is getting lower and lower. So how could we tackle with it and for that interactive fiction and on that all genre?
Yeah. So the time being low is essentially the committed time, right? So people are still playing lots of games, but it's the notion of how much time you think you've got to play games, right? Like everyone's done that, where you open up Steam, you want to play a game, you're just going to be doing it for an hour, and then you're there for ages, right? So it's not the time that people are playing games. People are playing games for longer than they ever have, but it's the perceived time that people think that they have is a lot shorter than it's ever been before in history, right? Well, not in history, I've not been here forever, but certainly in terms of modern gaming history, the perceived time that people have is now a lot shorter.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.